Thank you, Marcy, for introducing me. And hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about packages and developments in molecular representation method for drugs. So a quick introduction about me. So I have just graduated from UMich. I've studied my undergrad and master both over here. Love and over. I'm currently in China right now, so 12 hours of time difference. And I haven't speak English for about 4 months-ish, so bear with me, sorry. So please feel free to stop me anytime during the talk if you ever have any questions, and we could definitely discuss about it. If I don't know the answer, which is also highly possible, I would definitely note down the questions and I would do my best to research and get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you. So about the topic, so the rapid development of machine learning and deep learning algorithm in the recent decades has spurred an outburst of their applications in many research fields. So in the chemistry domain, machine learning has been widely used to aid in drug screening, drug toxicity predictions, anti-cancer synergy score prediction, etc. So this talk is dedicated to the packages in the molecular representation method for drugs. Specifically, we will focus on the molecular representation, which is like a crucial element to the success of chemistry-related prediction tasks. So this talk will introduce mainly 3 types of commonly used molecular representation method, together with their implementations and application examples. So the field of molecular representation is growing rapidly, and scientists are proposing many new ways of representations every year. Therefore, a comparison between different types of representation is crucial to understand their applications to drug response predictions and any kinds of like chemical representations. So there are general reviews about like article intelligence and drug discoveries, whereas in this talk, like the main goal is to like provide like a brief introduction of key ideas and differences between common molecular representation method for drug response predictions and just representations. So we could see over here, like there are multiple types of formulas are used to represent these octane molecules. An intuitive way to represent a molecule is through its name. So however, simply naming chemical substance has been a challenge in history. So the major concern of a naming rule resides in this robustness. So one substance should be mapped to a unique name, regardless of how complicated the chemical structure is. So intuitively, why can like a well-designed naming scheme, like what is taught in our organic chemistry class, serve as a good molecular representations? So unfortunately, the chemical nomenclature is typically difficult to follow. Meanwhile, the chemical names themselves do not explicitly capture the structure and bounding information. Therefore, different ways of molecular representations were developed based on simple rules and as well as being able to capture useful informations. So we classified the numerous molecular representation into mainly 3 broad categories shown over here. So the first is a linear notation category, of which the data structure is a string. And there's 2 major types of it. The first is simplified molecular input line entry system, which is also abbreviated as SMILES. Another one is international chemical identifier, which is abbreviated as INCHO, I believe. And the second type is molecular, the FP stands for fingerprints. It's a molecular descriptor categories, which use hash mapped bit string to represent the 2D structure of a molecule. The last representation method is a graph notation. And it uses a graph to represent the full connection as well as the atomic features of a molecule. So for graphic notations, the 2 major types of them are graph representations and MP and M-based representations. So here's an example of caffeine which I love. Caffeine molecule represented by the 3 major categories of molecular representations. We could see over here like it's separated by 2 parts. On the left is linear presentation, and it's like a smile string, which is like one type of linear representation. Beneath it is like molecular fingerprint. We can see like molecular fingerprint can be generated from smile strings, and we will also demonstrate that in this talk. And so these two can interchange like in the program. And over here is the graph representation. However, like although it's separated over here, it is possible to do in the packages to generate like one from each other. For example, like if you have a name of the molecule, you can actually find the smile string, and you can also find the fingerprint. You can generate smile string from fingerprint or fingerprint from smile string, and you can also like later use the smile string because like it's actually like a very important aspect in the molecular representation field. You can use the smile string to also do a lot of things, including generated graph representations. So also note, there's always like a trade-off between the complexity and the description power of the representation. So what the aim of many ongoing researchers is to achieve a representation method that is both cheap in memory and strong in description power. The reality is such trade-off is inevitable. So therefore, the following section will be roughly like following the logic going from the simpler and weaker representation, which is like from the linear. This is like 1D representation, and to like the more complex representations. And they will be more powerful in like representing the molecules. So it would be linear, which is 1D, to the fingerprint, which is like kind of like 2D, and to the graph, which is kind of like 3D representation. So although the recent focus of the field has been majorly devoted to the complicated graph notation categories, the other 2 types of representation are also shown like great performance in many drug response prediction tasks. So it's still worthy for introducing the 2 earlier types. And like I think like smiles is still like really powerful. So like when evaluating like a molecular representation, 3 basic principles should be considered. So the first one is a representation should be able to capture structure information of chemical substance, since like chemical or drug properties are heavily dependent on the structure information. The second is the generation rule of a representation should be reasonably simple so that a program can robustly follow it. The third one is a representation should be as simple as possible in its mathematical form, so that it can be easily handled like by downstream, for example, like machine learning frameworks. And we will also follow this principle throughout the talk. So this first one to introduce is the linear notation. So over here is the inchel identifier. So we can see from the graph over here, like we will input like a chemical, and it will normalize the chemicals. Of course, like a lot of informations are lost over here because like it would just be a 2D graph. And like from like common names and such, it generated like an inchel string, which is like listed over here based on its structure. And then by hashing, like it created like a inchel key, which is like unique. On the next slide, we will talk about like how it goes from here to here. So inchel and the smiles, which is like the simplified molecular input line entry system, are 2 basic linear representations. Both representations are generated by traversing the molecular connectivity graph based on a depth-first search algorithm, which is always exhausted a branch of the graph to its like leaf atom and returns a one-dimensional traversal result as a string. So we could see over here, this is how the in-shell key is generated. First, like they made this in-shell key based on the structure, and then like each part of it like represent like have meanings. So first, so the first blocks, which is like the first 14 letters, encodes molecular skeletons. So it shows the connectivity of the molecule. And the next 8 letters encode the stereochemistry, like for example, like whether you have isotope or not. So this is like why in-shell is better than smiles, because sometimes like smiles could not tell like isotopes from each other. So the going on from there, the next letter is like a flag character, indicates like standard in-shell key. And there's also like a flag character for in-shell version, and character indicators a number of projects. So luckily we don't need to do it by ourselves. Like if you put it in the program, it would do it for you. And also if you go to a lot of website, like for example, like PubChem, or like drug combo, like the in-shell format of the chemical is already generated for you. So you just need to download it. And another linear notation, which is simplified molecular include line entry system, also abbreviated as SMILES. So here is 2 examples of SMILES representations. So the SMILES representation of A, I think is a isopropyl hydroxybenzonate molecule, and like B is like a 2 methyl formate molecule. So in both like figures, like the atom traversal order is labeled by numbers, like what the traversal operation is shown within the arrows. So for example, like one can be over here and it starts from over here. And like I think like SMILES is like better for its use. For example, like if you see over here, you can kind of like guess like what the structure is like. However, for in-shell it's like very hard. It's basically not very like readable for humans. So over here, like the arrows in both figures illustrate the linear molecular traversal process that ultimately generates a SMILES representation. Since the 1D traversal result depends on the starting atom, they can be like multiple valid SMILES representation given like a molecule, and the mapping between the representations and molecules are not unique. So you can start, I think, wherever you like. I think like for different generator, it start from different positions. It have its preferences, so it can actually create SMILES. So when in-shell like is unique, SMILE is not. So one molecule can generate several SMILES. So because of that, the idea of canonical SMILES has been created to avoid degeneracy and generate like a unique representation for each molecule. So in practice, the generation principle of the canonical SMILES differ between like chem informatic toolkits, I think. But the uniqueness of SMILES can be guaranteed within one toolkit. So if you like use one package throughout, the SMILES you are going to generate it will be the same. However, like although SMILES have the bad degeneracy properties, like of like it can generate multiple forms, different version of like SMILES like based on one molecule, it turns out to be beneficial when data argumentation is needed. So it has been reported that using multiple SMILES string from the same molecule as an argumentation strategy has successfully boosted model performances. So if you want to do machine learning and you have like multiple SMILES representation for one molecule, they can also be good features. Like sometimes like they can boost the model preferences, because like if you start from different position, they might include like different information within these structures. So these two representations, especially in CHO, have been widely used for storing chemical structures. So a user can easily fetch this representation from existing molecules in database like DrugBank and PubChem. They can also be generated from many well-established software packages, including the CADD groups, Chem Informatic tools, and the use service and the intro generation packages. So usually I think like for smiles, for many projects and for many websites, it is used as like another names of the chemicals. So you can just, they're usually like in the ASCII file, like you download it, it's usually beside the names. So they can actually directly be used like when you're downloading them. But if you want to generate them, there are also like multiple packages that can do it. So before we go on to like how to generate it, like smiles, we will briefly talk about like the pros and cons of the linear notations. So the major advantages of smiles and intro have already like surfaced. They're very easy to generate. They have like trivial mathematical structures and require small storage space. So however, like before we present any application cases, one can easily notice an inherent disadvantage of smiles and intro as well. So they are one-dimensional in nature, so that they cannot capture complicated structures information. Moreover, smiles notation mainly focus on molecules with bonds that can fit the I think two electron valence model, and fails for molecules that lie outside of this criteria. So owing to the simplicity of their form, linear notations, especially smiles, can be efficiently used in many machine learning-based drug-related tasks. For example, like drug response predictions. So here I'm going to show how to generate smiles through PubChem. Can you guys see my command file?
Yes, you see it.
Thank you. See if we can copy. So basically, one need to like type everything in the let me see how I can do it. So, sorry, 1 minute. Can I go back? Okay, let me just open the window. Okay, now it worked. So basically, PubChem PY is a package you can use for generated smiles, and it's also like from the name you can see it's something related to PubChem. So it's actually like a very powerful toolkit that connected to PubChem. Like PubChem is like known to be like storage of a lot of chemicals and chemical properties. So this is like a package that can retrieve all of them. So basically, you can convert the molecule name, like as long as you have the name of the compound, like you can get its smiles. So this is very useful, like when you get like a files with a lot of drug names, but you want the smiles. So you can actually like just like get all the names, right? Like a small function and input the name over here. And then you can get, this is the smiles of the compound. So like for installing PubChem PY is also pretty easy. I believe you can just do like pipe install. PubChem PY. I think like this is all you need to install PubChem PY, which is actually very good because like later, for example, for RDKit is unique Conda environment, and if you have a Mac, it's kind of like harder to get. But for PubChem PY, I definitely recommend because it's a very small package, but also very powerful. And if you want to do a lot of like chem related practices, is like really powerful because like it's like inherently like linked to PubChem. Can go back to slides. Also, you can also use Smile throughout like PubChem PY as shown over here. So you just need to import like another package called SYS, and like if you have the Smiles, you can also get like its longer name. For example, like over here is just like glucose, but now you can get like its longer name. You can also do a lot of things like through PubChem PY. For example, like you can also generate it as like SDI file. It can be 2D version or the 3D version of it. So you can actually generate it like the structure of the like the 3D format of the chemical structure like, from the PubChem PI. So like later we will now we will moving on to like molecular fingerprints. So aiming at capturing more structural information, people develop molecular fingerprint method to represent molecules. Like, although a molecular fingerprint is generally in the form of a bit string, it is generated by functional group, which is like structure key, a circular neighbor, which is like circular fingerprints mapping algorithm, which are inherently 2D algorithm and different from a linear notation. So the generation rule of the molecular fingerprint is slightly more complicated than Smiles, yet it is still easy to implement. So the most commonly used molecular fingerprints, including the fingerprint 2, like FP2, and also MAC CCS and ECPF fingerprints are well integrated into existing open source chem informatics software packages. For example, like RDKit, OpenBabel, and CDK. So before introducing specific types of molecular fingerprints, we could like first summarize the pros and cons of these representations. So the major advantage of the molecular fingerprint is its simple mathematical structure. So it is always fixed length big string. It's often 100 to 5,000 bits, regardless of the size, shape, and atomic types of input molecules. So this characteristic make it extremely friendly to many downstream machine learning tasks and also like for all kinds of analyzations. Furthermore, to achieve better performance in drug response prediction test, it is often necessary to integrate multiple features from both the drugs and the genomic profiles of the cell line of the patients. And for all kinds of researchers, you might also need to integrate like multiple features. So the simple form of molecular fingerprints enables it to be integrated into machine learning model with other types of features, which is like a really good point. Another advantage of molecular fingerprints is that they are very small in size. So they can be fast modeling training and tasks for downstream machine learning. So although molecular fingerprints are simple in their mathematical structure, they're actually very powerful in many applications, except for tasks that require like 3D structure information because they don't have it, such as like stereochemistry. So when linear notation inevitably sacrifice description power for model simplicity, molecular fingerprints reside like at like well-balanced point. So we will briefly introduce two major types of molecular fingerprints based on the generation strategy. So the structured T fingerprint and the circular fingerprints. So here's an example of the structured fingerprint, which is like MACCS fingerprint. So we use this molecule as example where the representation of the functional group is denoted by 1 in the active B string. Absent of the function group is denoted by like 0. So over here, when this group exists, it would be a 1 because like we have this group. And over here, it might be like another chemical group that doesn't exist, so you become like 0. Over here, like the exo group would be 1, and like each of them like represent like a 1 in this like string. So the generation rule of the structure key is thus simple. So it uses a binary bit string of 0 and 1 to encode the absence and presence of the function group. So two widely used structure keys are the molecular access system, like MAC keys, and the chemical advanced template search, so like the CAT. Over here is like a MAX key. So the structural key reliably encoded the function groups of a molecule. However, like one major disadvantage is that like they do not provide relative position of this functional group, because like it's also like shown over here. We don't know like what does this one represent and what does this one represent. So like it can be lead to information loss of the local environment or like the scaffold of like the molecule. So one potential consequences is that like structured key cannot distinguish structurally unrelated but biologically similar compounds. Another disadvantage is that like they can only encode known functional group, and the determination of the functional group is a difficult and like a difficult task. So over here is like another type. So this is like a circular fingerprint. This is like a ECFP type strategy. So for each non-hydrogen atom, which is red over here, and initial integer identifier is assigned to the representation, the local information. So the number of bonds and connecting atom through a hash mapping functions. Then the identifier are iteratively updated based on the Morgan algorithm, which combines the initial identifier with identifiers of neighborhood atoms. So the neighborhood atoms are defined by our circular fragment, where the radius values, which is like, it could be 0, 1, 2, and 3 in the figure. It gradually increased to include more neighborhood atoms. Finally, like the redundant identifiers, like the two circular fragments contain identical atoms and connections, are removed, and fixed length bit string is derived from the identifier list. So rather than describing the existence of a functional group, circular fingerprints aim at representing the neighborhood environment of each atom. So one of the most widely used circular fingerprint is the extended connected fingerprint, which is like ECFPS, which is like this type over here. So the most popular ECFP is a Morgan's fingerprint, which generated fingerprint based on Morgan's algorithm. So first, the user need to predefine a radius of the interest. Then for each atom, the algorithm determines the neighboring substructure within the radius of interest and hash of the result to a fixed length bit string. So after repeating this process for every atom, the fingerprint is obtained. And scheme of this process is shown like over here, which is being like implemented in many chem informatics softwares. So comparing to the structural keys, like circular fingerprint can always generate a meaningful fingerprint representations through self-learning structures based on the predefined radius of the interest without prior knowledge to any functional group. However, like if we examine this figure more carefully, there are cases that multi-substructures are hash mapped into the same bit. So in this situation, it is not directly interpretable since we cannot like undo the hash mapping process and decipher that each 0 or 1 of the base string refers to. And moreover, the hash map operation could inevitably lead to information loss due to like bit collision issues. So we can use like fingerprints as well, like through PubChem POI. And also you can also use another. So over here we will introduce another package which is called RDKit. For the 3D dimensional structure, you can also use RDKit as well. It's another like very powerful toolkit. However, like it is harder to install. You can only use Conda to install it. And over here, like I would just like go over here. Like this is like the screenshot of my code and print out, so we don't need to go back and forth. So first of all, of course, like we need to import this package, and then like we will also import a lot of like chem related package from this packages. This is like actually like an older version. Like you can definitely do newer versions like if you download it now. But like basically like RDKit chem is a package we want to use in the RDKit. So for example, like over here I use smiles, but you can actually get it from names. For example, like if you have the name of it, you can also use like chem get name to retrieve the molecule. So over here, like we just pretended like we already know the smiles of the molecule. And we use the smile as a key to search for the molecule. So over here, like if we use like chem, which is like this package, and we try for the smiles and print out the molecule, it shows like this like an object. And like if we use like Jupyter environment, which actually like print out the molecule to view it. And we can like convert like a RDKit molecule to smiles. Like for example, like just do more to smiles and it will become smiles. And we can also convert RDKit molecules to the key. So it can be over here. So for the fingerprints, it's like in the same packages. You can just like do like change it to fingerprint, and you will and this toolkit will like retrieve like the fingerprint of the chemical. So next we will move on to the graph notations. So in recent years, like graph notation has become like a state-of-the-art molecular representations, comparing to the simpler linear notations and fingerprints. The graph notation encodes like more structured information. So as like a trade-off between the description power and the complexity, the graph notation is complicated in many ways, and machine learning methods on the graph representation by themselves have become like focused on a lot of current studies. So we would divide like the later part into like two parts. So we will first introduce a graph representation method, then briefly introduce some existing like graph propagating methods. So for graph notations, the packages recommended are like RDKit package and DeepCam. RDKit is like a really powerful package, but you have to be on the Conda environment. So in the graph representation of molecule, each atom is represented as a node, while bonded atoms are connected by edges. So the connectivity relationship between nodes can be easily described by like a n times n like adjacency matrix, which is like any matrix over here can be shown. So usually referred to as a matrix A. When the element of like one of it denotes whether or not like the nodes I or the J are connected. So for example, like we look at this adjacency matrix, if we look at 1, like it's connected to 2, so it's marked over here. 2 is connected to both 1 and 3, so 1 and 3 have like a 1 over here. So another important matrix in the graph representation is the node feature matrix on X, which is shown over here, where each node is encoded by a set of like user-defined features. So the feature matrix of a molecule can take in common chemical properties of atoms. For instance, atom electronegativity, formal charge, radius, and etc. So if we like incorporate the 3D dimensional coordinates of each atom into the node features, then the graph notation could be like capable of capturing the full 3D structure information of the molecule, which like cannot be achieved by any of the previous molecular representations. So similar to the idea of node features matrix X, one can also create like a matrix E, which is also shown over here, to represent edge features as well. For instance, like bond orders, bond types, bond lengths for each chemical bonds. So this is like example like of all the important matrices. Like you can definitely like create like others, but these 3 like is like most intuitive and simple types of graph representation for molecules. So application wise, we already talked about like the generation of graph representation has been achieved by like many existing softwares. RDKit and DeepCam are pretty good. And like these softwares like have like documented API, which is like a live and resourceful user community, and are well maintained. Like when these packages deal with the heavy lifting of generating the adjacency metrics, how to customize the node and edge features is a key factor to improve the performances. So many GNN propagation rules under the message passing neural network framework is like a general framework for learning nodes embedding for learning the whole graph representations. So this framework decomposes the learning into 2 phases. Like the first one is the message passing phase, during which the information is shared between nodes to update node features, and also like the readout phase, like during which like the feature vector of the whole graph is learned. An example of the framework is a graph convolution network. So in figure like B2D over here, the convolution operation in a GCN is very similar to that in a traditional convolution neural network. So B over here shows like information flows through graph convolution. So basically like it just like flows around. So C over here shows like the graph convolution operation in a GNN architecture. Like the nodes of the interest is coloring red, and an edge connected to the nodes of interest are coloring red in orange. So the scheme of the convolution operation in a CNN architecture. So on the left is an example of like the 2x2 convolutional kernel, and the corresponding input and output are shown. So on the right, the node of interest is colored in red, and the kernel is represented by the dashed square. So in addition to the MPNN framework, the other types of graph neural network have been proposed recently to further improve the graph-based propagation procedure. So in the neural fingerprint model, for a target node interest within a molecular graph, the influence of its neighbor node decreases with the topological distance. However, the topological adjacency is not the only factor that determine node-node interactions. So nodes with like large topological distance are still able to form intramolecular interactions such as hydrogen bond. So in figure 3, E over E over here, the attentive FP models was proposed to address like this issue. The impact of a node was learned through like a graph attention mechanism compared with like previous graph-based molecular representations. In figure F, GCM-based approach was proposed for predicting universal predictions of molecules and materials. So it is also the first attempt to predict the properties of a two-dimensional prone materials by GCN. And a new method inspired by algebra, like graphs has been like reported recently. So in this algebraic graph assisted transformer framework in figure G over here, the three-dimensional molecular information is first included into a weighted color algebraic graph. So the figure G over here shows like the scheme of the method that extract information from weighted color like graphs of molecules. So this mentioned combines two types of molecular representations. So the BT features generated from the bidirectional transformer treatment on SMILES, and the AG features generated from the I think like the molecular graphs Gaussian matrix, I think. So like for the graph notations, it has like pros and cons. So the advantages like and disadvantages are also like pretty obvious over here. So for the computational cost of the calculation is relatively expensive for the graph notations. Meanwhile, the information from the unlabeled molecular data was learned and extracted as lectin vectors by the bidirectional encoder of a transformer model. By fusing multiple representation from the algebraic graphs. So the bidirectional transformer and other machine learning algorithm improve the prediction of many molecular properties. So the graph notation are not perfect only to the interpretation like issues. So the saliency map, like a commonly used tool in computer vision, provides an opportunity to analyze the activation of the input graphs and rationalize the feature importance of a graph, or even produce better features. So unlike the better established molecular fingerprint representations, so the graph representation is still developing rapidly, so that selecting like a proper notation as well as the proper GNN architecture might be very challenging. Another issue for graph notation is that they may fail to describe complicated molecules, such as like coordination molecules or like ionic molecules. It would be very hard, like if the like electrons are just like flying around. So in terms of like predictive performances, graph-based molecular representations are not necessarily the best solutions. So recently, comprehensive benchmark study actually shows that the average descriptor-based traditional machine learning models outperform graph-based neural network. So when like doing like computational calculations, like it should be considered, like especially given like low computational costs and competitive performances, like whether we want to choose like graph notations or not. So this is the citations, and thank you so much for your time and patience. Do anyone have like any questions?
If anyone online has questions, you can either raise your Zoom hand or put the question in chat. And if anyone in the room has questions, feel free to speak up and ask. You may in the room though need to make sure you project or go up a little closer to the microphone.
Thanks. That was a really comprehensive and nice foundational talk. I'm curious if you could say a little bit about maybe how you're using these different representations in some of the ongoing work you're doing, or how it is that you got to be presenting about these topics.
Sorry, like connection like stopped for a while. So sorry, like do you mind like repeat your question, please?
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for the this nice foundational talk of representations. This good comprehensive presentation. I'm curious if you could say a little bit about how maybe you're using these representations, or how it is that you came to present them here.
Yeah. So thank you so much for the question. So this is actually all what I do in my undergraduate and my graduate schools. So basically, I start using them while doing my project in the lab. So in my undergraduate studies, I studied chemistry and then went to like the bioinformatics program, and the project I do mainly want to focus on like doing drug combinations. So I want to like analyze the chemical structure of the drugs, especially like there's like a small, I think like properties I want to do is like the homolumal gap, which is like a orbital differences between like inside like one chemicals. So like I started using like all of them. So for example, like I think like if you get like a chemical, like it can be drug, it can be like any other chemicals. You can use multiple ways like to generate it, like the forms of it. For example, like for linear notations, like at first I just like get all the names, like I using the website called like drug combo. So you only have the name of the chemicals. So if I want to do like further machine learning method, I need to like get the smiles of it. So I generated like the linear notations like to get the smiles, and using the smiles and also get like the fingerprints. So I use molecular fingerprints for features for a long time, but then I later realized like it's really not enough, especially in like medical fields. Like you know, not only just like taking the drug, like the chemical structure also need to interact with like biological things like inside your body. So like a 3D formation will be really important. So like graph notation can also like be generated over here. So like this is basically how I started to use like all of them. And I think like depends on like different people like needs, like you can choose like whatever you want like inside this category. I don't know whether I answer your questions.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions?
I have a question. So in the node feature matrix, one of the things that you incorporated was three-dimensional coordinates, but those are not necessarily unique for a given structure. They can be degenerate. How do you get around that in embedding the feature?
So the thing is, you can't get around it. Like the thing you said is like exactly right. Like it is not unique at all. And it's the same problem for two-dimensional as well. Like for smiles, it's like also not unique. For two-dimensional is not unique as well. And I think like whenever you do three-dimensional structures, it also like only capture like one frame of time like throughout like but like the molecule is like actually moving all the time. So like I think like there's no way to get around it, and just like a disadvantage of this notation. So I think like the real molecule is like actually really complex, and it's like moving around interaction with other molecules, and like all the molecular representations, although like the graph notation is like already like the 3D formation is like the closest one to the reality, it still have a lot of flaws, and I don't think like we can get around it. We just have to generate it and pray like machine learning can learn something about it, I guess.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Seeing anything online, and I'm not hearing anything in the room, so we can thank our speaker once again. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.